Claire Dawson was charting at the ICU nurse's station when she heard the laugh in the hallway. Bright, practiced. The kind of laugh that had once filled every room in her childhood house except the one she'd stood in. Her hands went still over the keyboard before her mind caught up with why. Rachel. Her sister. 2,000 miles from where Claire had left her 7 years ago. She turned, and there she was walking down the ICU corridor in heels that clicked against the tile like punctuation. Smiling at Claire like she'd found the last page of a book she'd been trying to finish. 6 weeks later, what her sister asked of her would cost Claire the one thing she'd spent 7 years building. But that morning, all Claire knew was that the floor under her had changed shape, and nobody had warned her. She needs you to understand what she built before she tells you how close she came to losing it. At 27, Claire had landed in Idaho Falls with $400, a nursing license, and no one in the state who knew her last name. She rented a room above a garage. She took every night shift anyone would give her. She learned the ICU the way some people learn scripture, until the monitor spoke to her in a language she trusted more than most people's words. Helen Marsh, a veteran nurse who'd worked the unit for 20 years, trained her that first winter and became something close to family. Dr. Whitfield, the lead intensivist, once told a room of residents that if Claire Dawson said a patient was turning, you moved, that was a life and she'd made it herself. Nobody had handed it to her from a window while she watched. Because that was the sentence Claire had carried across the country like a stone sewn into her coat. They always found room for Rachel. For me, they left a plate on the porch. She never said that sentence out loud to anyone in Idaho. She just worked. She got good and quiet and free. For 6 years it held. Then a woman from HR walked a new director down Claire's hallway for introductions, heels clicking, and it was her sister smiling at her like a photograph she'd been waiting years to take. There had never needed to be a good reason for leaving Claire behind. When she was 9, it was car sickness. She stayed with a neighbor while the rest of the family drove to the lake. At 12, the theme park tickets came in a set of 3, so she was the one left home, and somehow that was reasonable too. At 15, it was money, which was strange because Rachel got a ski trip that same winter. Every excuse made sense on its own. That was the trick of it. You can't fight a reasonable thing. If Claire cried, she was dramatic. If she asked why, she was starting something. Her father used to say, "Don't make your mother feel bad," as if her mother's feelings were the fragile thing in the room, and not the child slowly learning she came second to her own sister. Rachel hadn't done it to her. Not really. Rachel was 4 years younger and had simply lived inside the warm part of the house the way you live inside a climate you were born into. She'd never once stood on that porch. She didn't know it existed. So when people asked Claire why she didn't just talk to her sister and clear the air, she wanted to tell them the air was never the problem. The house had been built crooked before either of them could walk. You don't clear that. You leave it. Claire, this is Rachel Vance, our new director of patient experience, the HR woman said. She'll be partnering with all the units on culture and quality. Vance. She'd taken her husband's name. For one merciful second, Claire let herself hope it was a coincidence. Then Rachel said, warm and pleased, "Actually, we know each other. This is my sister." And Claire watched every nurse at the station quietly file the information away. Director of Patient Experience sat over every unit's culture scores. Which meant, in the part of the org chart nobody said out loud, her sister now had a line into how her work got graded. Claire kept her face flat. She'd held a flat face over a coding patient before. She could hold it over this. "Welcome to Idaho Falls," she said, and shook Rachel's hand like she was meeting a vendor. By the end of the week, there was a story, and Claire hadn't agreed to any of it. Rachel told it in the break room, light as a napkin. "We lost touch for a few years, and then the universe puts us in the same hospital, can you believe it?" And rested a hand on Claire's shoulder when she said it, so that pulling away would have made Claire the villain of the scene. She called her sis in front of the unit, and the unit smiled because it was a sweet thing to see, Two sisters reunited. Claire felt the old machinery start up beneath her feet, the machinery that said your job is to make this look good for her. She watched Helen soften toward Rachel over 3 days. Helen, who was hers. She seems lovely, Helen said. She is, Claire said, and charted a pain score, because the alternative was explaining a childhood in a hallway. Here's what made it worse. For the first time in years, Claire wanted something out loud. The ICU nurse manager position had opened when the previous manager retired, and Dr. Whitfield had stopped her by the medication cart. Apply. Don't argue. She didn't want the title. She wanted the say, the schedule that didn't burn people out, the hires who'd stay, the right to finally run the unit the way she'd quietly been running it for 2 years while someone else got the office. But the decision went to a panel, and the panel weighed culture and patient experience metrics. And she already knew whose department owned those words now. She applied anyway. Hit submit like handing someone a knife and asking them to hold it carefully. That night, her mother texted her for the first time in 7 years. Rachel told us where you are. We're coming to visit. Your father misses you so much. Love, Mom. Not I'm sorry. Not we were wrong. Just we're coming and you'll host the feeling the way you always hosted the feeling. They flew out the following week and stayed at a Hampton Inn near the interstate, which her mother mentioned twice, as if a hotel were a gift she was giving her. Her father hugged Claire in the lobby like the last 7 years had been a long weekend. Her mother, Linda, looked her over and said, "You're too thin. Are you eating?" 7 years, and the opening note was Claire's body. Dinner was at an Olive Garden because Rachel picked it, and Rachel picked everything the way water picks the low ground. Claire watched her mother build the evening's mood brick by brick, laughing at her father's jokes a beat early, telling the waiter they were celebrating being all together again, constructing a scene whose entire shape was nothing ever happened. No porch. No plate. Just 2 sisters and their proud parents and a bottomless bowl of salad. 20 minutes in, talk had turned entirely to Rachel. The promotion, the new house, 7-year-old Sophie's ballet recital. Claire's father asked her one question about the winters, and before she'd finished answering, her mother was already telling Rachel she looked tired and should let her husband take Sophie more. Claire tried once, gently, in the parking lot afterward, when the valet stand was empty and the interstate hissed behind them. "Mom, do you remember the Thanksgiving before I left? You left a plate for me on the porch." Something flickered across her mother's face. Fear, maybe, or the exhaustion of a woman who'd spent 40 years holding a story together with both hands and couldn't let go of one corner without the whole thing coming down. Then it closed. "We're family," Linda said. "Family doesn't keep score." Her father said it was cold and steered her mother toward the rental car. Rachel touched Claire's arm on the way past. "She means well. She really does." And Claire stood alone in the parking lot and finally understood why they'd come. Not to account for the porch. To bury it. To fly 2,000 miles and pour a warm dinner over it until it softened and disappeared. So the family story could stay smooth and her mother would never have to look at the corner she was still holding shut. They hadn't come for their daughter. They'd come for a clean record. And a clean record required Claire's silence. Rachel didn't leave because Rachel lived there now. Monday she was back on the floor with a clipboard, calling it a patient experience initiative, and underneath the pleasant name was a scalpel with Claire's name on it. She shadowed rounds. She watched Claire tell a family gently and honestly that their father wasn't going to wake up, because they deserved to plan their lives around truth, not around a hope she knew was empty. Afterward in the hallway, Rachel said kindly, "You're so good with them. I just wonder if we could soften the delivery a little. Warmth scores really matter to the board." Soften the delivery. Claire's directness, the thing that had held families together at the worst hour of their lives, was quietly being recategorized in a report as a deficiency. And the person writing the report shared her last name. The following Thursday, Claire came back from a long code, bone-tired, and found a plate waiting on her desk. A real plate, a slice of homemade apple pie under plastic wrap, and a note in Rachel's round handwriting. Truce. I've missed you more than you know. R. Claire stood over it and couldn't breathe right. Rachel didn't know. She'd never stood on the porch. To her this was pie. To Claire it was the last Thanksgiving. The storm door locked, the taillights pulling away, a paper plate going cold on the boards while she stood inside the glass and understood, in one image, exactly where she stood in that family. You set a place at the table for someone. You leave a plate on the porch for someone you don't. She didn't eat the pie. She scraped it into the trash, washed the plate, dried it, and put it in her bag. She didn't know why she kept it. She only knew she wasn't done with it yet. 3 weeks before the hospital's annual employee recognition gala, Claire learned 2 things on the same afternoon. The first was that Rachel was on the planning committee. The second was that her parents were flying back out, as guests of the director at a work event, her work event, the same week the manager panel would finalize its impressions. She sat with that fact until it turned cold and clear. This was never going to be a fight she could win by being right. She could be the best nurse in that building, and it wouldn't matter because somewhere between now and the gala, a photograph was going to be worth more than a mortality review. Rachel said it plainly in the end, in a nice office with a window Claire had once assumed came to whoever earned it. The board really listens to me on culture fit for the manager role, Rachel said, leaning back. It would help if we looked united at the gala. Mom and Dad there, the 4 of us. A nice picture. People remember a nice picture. She smiled the whole time. She probably didn't even feel it as a threat. In her own story, she was the peacemaker, offering her sister a bridge. Claire looked at the window, the plants, the office she hadn't earned yet, and said, I'll let you know. 2 nights before the gala, her mother called, and used the softest weapon in the family's arsenal, the voice that reached past 34 and grabbed 9. Just smile for one night, sweetheart, Linda said. For your father. He's not getting any younger. Can you do that for us? It wasn't a request to smile. It was a request to sign, to agree in a photograph that would outlive all of them, that the story was true, that nothing was broken, that the plate on the porch had never happened at all. Claire said she had to go. She hung up and stood in her kitchen with the clean plate on the counter, and for the first time she understood exactly what it was for. 2 nights later, she walked into the atrium under the glass ceiling and the borrowed chandeliers, wearing the one good dress she owned, knowing precisely how the evening had been staged, and having no idea yet that before the night was over, her sister would hold out a plate in front of the entire board, the CEO, her weeping father, and a photographer already lifting his camera, and ask her in front of everyone to finally take her seat. The atrium was full by the time Claire arrived. A string trio playing something that made small talk feel important, board members drifting near the awards table, the good chandeliers throwing warm light over everyone's best clothes. Her father wore the tie he saved for funerals and weddings. When he saw her, his face opened up so completely it hurt, because his love was real. It had just never been enough to move him to her side of a room. Her mother, Linda, worked the crowd in blue, telling a board member's wife about her 2 daughters, both in medicine in a way. Isn't it wonderful? Rachel found Claire within 90 seconds and took her elbow, steering her toward the knot of people who mattered. Dr. Whitfield, 2 board members, the CEO with the good handshake. Everyone, this is my sister Claire, our ICU charge nurse. Honestly, the backbone of that unit. Warm, generous, perfectly pitched. Claire watched the trap close with something almost like admiration. It was elegant. Rachel had just been gracious about her in front of the exact people who mattered, which meant that when the photograph came, refusing it would look like spite against a sister who'd only ever said kind things. A photographer with a lanyard hovered at the edge of the circle, waiting for a cue he'd clearly already been given. 7-year-old Sophie stood nearby in a small velvet dress, holding her grandfather's hand, watching the adults with careful eyes. Then a server passed with a tray of desserts, and Rachel, quick and bright, lifted a small plate off it, a slice of something golden under the light, and held it out to Claire in front of all of them. "Here," she said, laughing warmly for the crowd. "You never eat. Welcome back to the family, sis." A plate held out to her. In front of the board. In front of her weeping father, already misting up. In front of the photographer, camera rising. The whole room tilted without knowing it, toward the picture that would run in the hospital newsletter and outlive them all. The reunited sisters, the offered plate, the warm ending to a story that had never been true. Take the plate. Smile. Get the job. Be easy. Be loved for one night. Claire looked down instead. Past the plate, past her sister's steady arm. At Sophie, watching with the careful eyes of a child already learning the exchange rate of love. She did not raise her voice. She had held steady over a coding patient with a family screaming in the doorway. She could hold steady here. "No, thank you," she said, quietly enough that only the circle heard. The camera came down, confused. Her mother's radiance flickered. The little plate hung in the air between the sisters with nowhere to land, and somewhere behind Claire's ribs, a house 2,000 miles and 25 years away finally, quietly, came down. "Claire," Rachel said, softer now, stepping in so the circle couldn't hear. "Don't do this here. Please. Just take the plate." Her mother closed in on the other side, still smiling for the room, her voice a hiss under the string trio. "Do not embarrass this family. Not here. Not in front of these people." There it was, undressed at last. The fear had never been about losing Claire. It was about the picture. The story staying smooth. "I know what you're offering," Claire said to Rachel, aiming her voice at just the two of them. "The photo and then a good word to the board. I'm not going to trade my life for a job. And since that's what it's stapled to now, I'm withdrawing from the manager search. I'll tell the panel myself tomorrow." Rachel's face went white. "You're throwing it away? To spite us?" That was the moment Claire could have gotten angry. She didn't, because she finally understood she wasn't spiting anyone. She was leaving an audition she'd been standing in since she was 9 years old. "I'm not spiting you," she said. "I'm just not paying for it anymore." Her mother's mask cracked, and for 1 second Claire saw all the way down. A frightened woman who had spent her life earning her own seat by keeping everyone else's story smooth, who had left a plate on a porch because that was the only arithmetic she'd ever been taught. Subtract the difficult one so the picture stays warm. Claire almost felt the old pull to comfort her. Instead, she said the thing she'd carried across the country like a stone. "You told me family doesn't keep score, Mom. You're right. I'm done keeping score. I'm keeping distance." She set her untouched water glass down on the table, and to the plate and the porch and the 25 years behind it, she said one more thing, quiet enough that only the three of them heard. "A place you have to earn isn't a place. It's an audition. I'm done auditioning." Then she walked out of the circle, past the photographer, past her father's stricken face, into the cold, clean air of the parking garage. She didn't look back to see the picture she'd refused to be in. She sat in her car for a long time, waiting for the panic to arrive, the old dread of having been difficult, of having ruined it. It didn't come. What came instead was quiet. She had just walked away from the job she wanted, in front of the people who could have given it to her, and for the first time in memory she didn't feel like she was being graded. That was when she understood what she'd actually done. It wasn't about Rachel or the board or even the plate. Leaving Ohio 7 years ago hadn't freed her. She'd simply carried the audition with her, kept her apartment spotless and her record flawless and her needs invisible, still trying to prove she was easy enough to deserve the room. Walking out of that circle wasn't the bravest thing she'd ever done. It was the first time she'd stopped performing a belonging she'd never actually been given, and simply belonged to herself instead. She withdrew from the manager's search the next morning in writing, before she could talk herself out of it. The role went to a capable nurse from the cardiac floor, who would do it well and hadn't had to sell anything to get it. Dr. Whitfield stopped Claire in the hallway that week and didn't ask what had happened at the gala. He just said, "Whatever that was, you did the right thing." It showed. A month later, he asked her to design and lead a new nurse residency program for the whole hospital. Her curriculum, her name on it, built around the same honest, unsoftened teaching her sister had once tried to file down as a warmth problem. It wasn't a consolation prize. It was the plain consequence of being someone people could trust, offered by a man who'd never asked her to perform anything to earn it. Her parents flew home to Ohio. Claire and her mother never repaired what had broken. Linda still told a version of the story where the porch had never happened, because that version was the only room she could afford to live in, and Claire had finally stopped trying to renovate it for her. The old fear hadn't died because Claire stood up to it. It had simply lost its grip on her. 3 weeks after the gala, a large envelope arrived from Ohio, addressed in a careful child's handwriting. Inside was a drawing from Sophie, 2 stick figures at a table, a big one and a small one, and in front of each of them, drawn carefully in brown crayon, a plate the exact same size. Both at the table. No porch. On the back, in Rachel's handwriting, 1 line. She drew this on her own. And underneath, smaller, like it had cost her something to write, "I've been thinking about the plates." Claire didn't know if her sister would ever climb all the way out of the warm house she'd been raised to guard. Golden children rarely did. The house was comfortable, and leaving it meant admitting the porch had been real. But she'd noticed. She'd noticed the plates. And her daughter, 7 years old, had already drawn a table where both places were set, unprompted, because one afternoon a blunt aunt had told her she was allowed, that she didn't have to ask for a glass of water, that she didn't have to be easy to be loved. That was where the chain finally broke. Not in the ones who'd been taught the arithmetic. In the ones who never learned it in the first place. Claire put Sophie's drawing on her refrigerator, next to the clean plate she finally understood, and stopped waiting for the family she'd been born into to set her a place. She used to think love was a table you had to earn your way back to. It isn't. It's a plate someone sets for you before you even ask. A cold one left on a porch, or a warm one offered freely at a desk, by someone who finally understands the difference. It took her 7 years to learn which one was which. But once she knew, her hands were steady, and she never had to hold the wrong plate again.